Good afternoon. It's great to see everybody here. I'm Sue Rollason, I'm the Chief Finance Officer here. And it was all going so well, wasn't it, until we started to talk about money. Because the old robot, it's not a cheap thing, is it? And that's the bit where we now have to put the business case together and we now have to make it stack for people. Apologies, because I can't remember which bit it clicks on, but anyway. But yeah, so building a pace for change. So strategy is where it all starts, and I'll go through that in a little while. But actually, you'll see our trust strategy everywhere. If your strategic direction doesn't support this, then actually you're never going to get it, because it won't launch from the offset. Business case is the key thing in terms of how you actually write the case, and then of course the evaluation. And the evaluation is an evaluation and improvement journey as well, and it has to be. And going through all of that, big word here, clinical engagement. So this case will not write itself unless you've got the right people supporting it to work through some of the challenges, to articulate the benefits clearly, but also, when I talk about that improvement journey, actually show how it can go from what is quite a learning curve actually, to actually what it will look like in the future and be, if you like, a productive asset for the organisation. Obviously, the patient benefit goes without saying. So, strategic alignment. There's a lot of nice to do things in healthcare. It has to be right in the centre of what your organisation is trying to do, whether that be in the NHS, whether that be elsewhere. It still has to be part of that centre. So what are the key questions you need to ask? And you also need to think about, is your strategy codependent on other strategies to work? And the reason why I say that is, if we look within, again, the NHS, we've got commissioners. So actually, if they don't want robotic centres, they're not going to support us in having a robot, and also in wider healthcare systems. So how is a wider healthcare system going to actually support you being a robotic centre as such, or having robots? So investment in robotic surgery, when we did it, we analysed against our strategic triangle, which clearly has the patient at the top, and we analysed together with the clinicians against the 6 strategic questions. So, strategic objectives, safest care, I don't think I need to go through after you've had a day today as such in terms of articulating that. Strategic aim for us is being a centre of excellence, so clearly around robotics. Enabling our people to be the best they can be, and that, of course, is around enabling with the most up-to-date equipment as well. Operational performance, research, innovation and education, another key pillar of our strategy. So again, clearly in terms of robotics, that's something that supports that strategic pillar. Financial sustainability and affordability. And that's where it all starts to go a bit wrong with these cases, unfortunately, because, as I say, they're expensive pieces of equipment. Actually, there is a learning curve, so at the start it tends to be less productive rather than more productive, and actually the ongoing cost in terms of consumables. So it's quite a difficult case to sell just on a financial and affordability perspective, but obviously, looking at the strategy as a whole, we can see how it meets many of those criteria. So what's a business case? Well, clearly it's a document that explains how the benefits of a project offset its costs and why it should be executed. It's to include all the project's objectives, costs and benefits, and to convince stakeholders of its value. It should show how clearly the strategy of the organisation, its tactical projects or business needs are advanced by that project. And critically, the case is an important project document to prove to client, customer, stakeholder that the project you're proposing is a sound investment. And there's 3 elements there that you'll have seen: strategic outline case, outline business case, and full business case as such. And that's a common case methodology as such. Now, in terms of a robot, you won't necessarily have to do an outline business case and a full business case, but actually the strategic outline case is something that certainly in this organisation we use for every project, if you like, and every investment, to actually work out, is it the right thing to do, and actually where does it get in a prioritisation? Because actually you can't actually invest in everything tomorrow, so what you need to do is prioritise that, and that's the first document we use to assess actually should something even go forward to be thought through in terms of an investment case. So key components of the case then: identify the problem. It needs to be needs-led. So what is the need? What is the quality outcome that you're trying to improve? What is the affordability around the financial consequences such in terms of, is it improved? Is that the problem? What's the objectives of the case? So does it make something more effective? So in other words, is there a quality improvement that you can articulate? Does it make something more efficient? So therefore you actually deliver more but for the same amount of investment. Is it around an economic case, so therefore it reduces the cost of something? Or is it actually a statutory compliance or a simple replacement? Critical success factors, those are the things that we measure at the end and they need to be included. Those are the things that that we put in to say by how much we think all of those things will actually change, and they are the things that need to be done to actually deliver, if you like, the objectives. And they need to be smart, so they need to be specific, they need to be measurable, they need to be targeted. So there's a quite specific thing. So we've just heard if one of the outcomes is actually that it reduces length of stay in critical care, then that clearly becomes one of the critical success factors, and that's the thing you go back and you actually measure. And if you're not doing what you said in the business case, then you have to go through a whole evaluation process and start to think about what you can do to actually change that. So we then go through a non-financial options appraisal, and that needs to be clearly articulated in terms of the weightings of the things that are important as part of the case. So yeah, if we're looking at the quality outcomes, they need to be quite specific to say actually how it improves quality. And it needs to be benchmarked against what is business as usual. So it used to be called do minimum. So basically, if you were just to continue the way you were now, what would that mean compared to the investment that you're making? The financial options appraisal. So the financial options appraisal for the robot's quite an interesting one, because firstly you have to quantify a huge amount of benefits as such, in the sense of not just the really obvious ones, but obviously pull in everything that you have around length of stay, but also the financial options appraisal that we did for the last robot was based on different, the options were also around different funding mechanisms, so different financing mechanisms I should say, and actually what that would do. So would it be a lease agreement, would it be buying the asset outright? What were the different options? What would it mean if we actually replaced our existing robot at the same time we were buying a new one? So it had all of that as part of the options appraisal, as well as just the options around should we do it or not as such. And that's the bit I've just described, to be fair. So that's the funding model as such. What will the funding model be for all of this? And then out of all of those things, you get your preferred option. And your preferred option needs to show quite clearly what the options appraisal says is the highest in terms of scoring, but it needs to really clearly articulate then how one thing then moves you into what does the future state look like? How will it be if you implement that preferred option? So return on investment and payback. So again, this is something that needs to be included. How does it generate return on investment for the amount of money that you input into it, but also what's the payback period? And dependent on your organisation, you'll have different things around whether you can do things that impact over a longer term, or if actually it has to be in the same financial year. Now, unfortunately in the NHS, we are a one-year cycle as such to much of a degree, so actually the payback period is quite difficult, but if it's part of your strategy, then you need to work out how that fits in with your longer term financial model. And what's the resource consequence? The resource consequence needs to be profiled. It will have a resource consequence quite often in terms of not only the financial resource, but one of the big things at the moment in most cases, which is actually a greater challenge, is the workforce resource. Certainly when you're adding to as opposed to just changing the service, the robot isn't quite like that, but nevertheless it still needs to be in there. And there needs to be a quality impact assessment. So actually that takes place in every case. You need to make sure that you look at how it will change quality. Risk and contingency plan needs to outline all of the things that may happen. We have a situation at the moment, don't we, where we've got inflation. We're in at a very high rate. A lot of the business cases that we had approved only a year ago are now at a much higher rate in terms of implementation, purely because of the inflation that's impacted. And then the benefits realisation plan. So how are you planning to realise those benefits? How do they then get embedded within your organisation? How are you then going to evaluate those as a core that you agree? And then what do you do if those benefits aren't realising at the rate that you thought they would do? So things such as an improvement plan, things such as looking at actually what were the assumptions behind the original business case, and then what is the consequence? Because there needs to be some consequence behind that. Benefits can be cash releasing. There's the easy ones for the financial model, but they can be non-cash releasing. Some of them are quantifiable, but they're not monetisable. So you can quantify, but you may not be able to turn those into cash as such. Length of stay ones tend to be the obvious one that fits in there. And then there's the qualitative benefits as well, which are the things that aren't quite as easy to put a number to, but really important to capture in the case. There may be things such as we heard there about experience, for instance. So actually, what would a patient experience change by as a consequence to putting this investment in? Overcoming the challenges. So I put a bit of a picture in the background there. It's BBC Hospital. I got stopped in my street, and BBC Hospital, Series 7, Episode 6, featured the robot. And I got stopped in the street, and a lady said, "I recognise you." I thought, this never happens. Because I was on Episode 6. "You're the lady who said no to the robot." Instantly, most hated. But no. And it was true. If you watch that episode, it was an incredibly challenging case to justify, because it didn't stack. From a financial perspective, it didn't stack. And it didn't stack for all of the things that we have talked about at the very start. So the consumables are very expensive. They're more expensive than the consumables that you would currently be using. There is a learning curve to some of this, and the positive thing is, though, now we can see that learning curve, so we can plan for it and we can do things about that. And certainly at the start, it just loses productivity, and actually, a theatre is a really important asset as well. So that's something that we had to think about and talk through. Certainly for the NHS, there's no specific tariff for many of the procedures at the moment. So I'm not sure who's aware, but we used to work under something called payment by resource, which was a tariff-based system. So when you did a procedure, you would get paid an amount of money, slightly changed post-COVID, but nevertheless, for most of the robotic procedures, other than two that sat in neurology, there was no tariff, which effectively means that every time you do the operation, you lose money, which is a really difficult one to square when clearly you're trying to build a financial case. Many of the benefits are difficult to quantify. So when you're actually putting something down that is for an investment case, actually to put them down and to quantify them to make them monetisable is a really tricky one. So if it's a length of stay saving, for instance, how do you turn that into something that's going to justify the investment based on you know, your operating model as such. And for us, certainly in the NHS again, capital is really constrained. So that is a huge issue. It's something that, you know, it is a real challenge. Hence the reason why we had to look at so many different financing models. And, you know, it does become very difficult when you're sitting against a whole plethora of priorities. So overcoming some of those challenges then, we went through and we costed every single procedure, income and expenditure, to look at what we would be getting in for it, actually how much it would cost us. So every single one, to actually look at then what our case mix needed to be to make it stack in terms of a running cost basis. And we did have to change the mix of what we could do on different procedures to make this work. Procedure and consultant specific instrument packs to ensure that only those instruments that are required are purchased, opened and used. So basically to reduce and eliminate all waste in the system. Changes in the theatre skill mix so that theatre practitioners use when a consultant is not required, such as mid-procedure adjustments to the robotic system arms, competition, or critical success factors. So again, making sure that the most expensive parts of the process, if you like, are done by the right people in that sense. So we did have to look at that. Formalise changes to operating session times and consultant job plans to minimise the overruns in theatres. So migrated to a 10-hour day for robotic operating lists. Dedicated robotic theatre and robotic theatre team to maximise performance and therefore utilisation. And then we got information, as much information as we could, on all the cost drivers, such as blood usage, length of stay, to drive further efficiencies. And our initial capital was from charitable funds for the second robot. But actually, that was something, so those challenges certainly weren't overcome by myself. We had to work really closely with the teams to work through how we could build the most efficient, if you like, productive case as we possibly could, and also information that the company got as well in terms of how we could actually make that the best practice really in terms of what we were trying to do. And there was certainly a learning curve that we had to build in, but we did make the case stack in the end. So actually, just a few weeks later, so I should probably go back to the BBC and tell them. But yeah, no, I think it's certainly not something that you can. It's not an easy case, but actually it needs everyone's involvement to make sure that all of those things are actually articulated. That's it, really.